Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored, live from New York. 벤샤피로 is live and uncensored. So come on then, what is a woman?
Well, I mean, a woman is whatever J.K. Rowling says a woman is. Right. And she's right. A woman is a biological human female.
How on earth have we got to a place where stating that simple fact has now become a stick to beat people with? When, from what I can ascertain, 99% of the entire planet agrees with that fact.
Yep. Again, it goes back to that idea that your subjective feeling about yourself must be reflected by the rest of the world, cheered and celebrated by the rest of the world, because that's actually what the ask is, right? The ask isn't even, I wish to be treated well in society, and you can think whatever you want of me, but you should treat me decently. That's not the actual ask. The actual ask is, I wish for you to participate in a delusion whereby I am a biological human female, or exactly the same in many important respects as a biological human female. Trans women are women, which, again, if you refuse to define
what... You've warned about this, and I've warned about it, and we've taken it to... We said in the warnings, if you take this to a logical conclusion, it's going to get abused. And we had a stark example of this in Scotland several weeks ago with this rapist, Adam Graham, who, at his trial, having raped 2 women with his penis, and let's be graphic about it.
Her penis.
Well, this is the point.
Yes.
He then turned up as Isla Bryson and said, I'm now a woman. So that's him before. And then he comes along as Isla Bryson there. And the game plan, according to his ex-wife, is, well, he just wants to get into a women's prison, which is obviously what his game plan was. And he got into one, put into a women's prison where there are women there who are vulnerable to attacks from people like him. That, to me, showed the insanity of this. We had a leader, Nicola Sturgeon, been leader of Scotland for 8 years, who supported this limitless gender identity nonsense and lost her job, actually, I think, as a direct consequence of this. Yep. I mean, let's see what she said, and I'll play it to you.
The question is, are all trans women women? You haven't answered that question.
Well, that's not the point that we're dealing with
here.
That's
the question I'm asking.
Trans women are women, but in the prison context, there is no automatic right for a trans woman.
So there are contexts where a trans woman is not a woman?
No, there is circumstances in which a trans woman will be housed in the male prison estate.
I think that interview cost her job, because when I watched that, it went on for about 50 seconds. It was jaw-dropping, because actually her ideology about this was just cruelly exposed as being completely ridiculous.
Well, it's an emperor's new clothes kind of thing. And again, when that happens to politicians who are supposed to supposedly traffic in fact, it makes it very difficult for them. And so when you take a completely logically unsustainable position, like trans women are women, but some of those women are going to be housed with the men, which is what she does in that clip, everybody can see how ridiculous it is. And it exposes the ideology for what it is, which is baseless and nonsense and extraordinarily negative. Because again, if you undermine societal perceptions of truth, we're supposed to be living in this terrible time of misinformation and disinformation. I can't think of anything worse in terms of misinformation than the idea that a biological man is in fact a female.
And when you see what's happening in sport, it's even more absurd, where you see 6'3" swimmers, formerly male swimmers, dominating the women's sport. And you think, well, where does this leave women's sport? If you just allow this to continue, ultimately, women's sport will get destroyed.
I mean, honestly, the most frightening part of this to me is not even sort of the direct consequences of this. And some of it is directed at kids, right? I mean, we are teaching kids in the United States who are 5, 6, 7 years old about gender fluidity, about how boys can become girls, which kids are vulnerable. Kids need to be protected from nonsense. And kids actually need rules and expectations. And basically saying to them that you can be a member of the opposite sex is insane. And what we've seen, predictably enough, from young people, from teenagers, is a radical, skyrocketing, increasing rate of people who are identifying as trans or gender non-binary, and then, not shockingly, at the exact same time, a rapid rise in suicidal ideation and depression and confusion. None of that is a shock. This is all a social contagion. And there's never been anything remotely like it.
Well, there was the scandal of the Tavistock Clinic in London, which, anyone who raised any concerns about this was immediately branded transphobic, which put people off raising concerns. But it turned out 97% of the young kids that were sent there for this gender reassignment turned out to have other issues, from autism to depression to 97%. And what they really needed was an adult to be adult about this and say, well, before we irrevocably change your body and cut you to pieces, we're actually going to have a proper conversation about these other issues you've got, right?
Exactly. But again, I think this is part of a broader attack on the notion of truth, and an attack on institutions is really what it is in the end. Because the question is, why is it so important to teach kids who are 5, 6, 7 years old about being gender non-binary or trans? again, there is an actual condition called gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder, and some people suffer from it. It's a very small percentage of the population. It is not 30, 40%, 20%, 10%, 5% of the population, but it does exist, obviously, and those people are suffering, and we should try to find ways to help them, whether that is in the medical context with regard to therapy or whether we're talking about, just families treating them well. But that is not the same thing as indoctrinating entire generations of people and forcing all of society to go along with it. I mean, this is the real issue.
Right.
You're asking all of society to tell a lie in the name of sensitivity. Well, once you've done that with any issue, you can do that with pretty much every issue.
Well, we saw it with the ridiculous farce of the Roald Dahl books, all having this sensitivity reading, removing hundreds and hundreds of words and phrases from this iconic author. He's sold 300 million books. Suddenly they're rewriting this stuff. And some of the rewrites were so completely ridiculous. One where tractors are referred to as black. They had to change that because somehow you can't have a black tractor. Well, what if the tractor's black?
One of the real problems here is that the modern context cannot understand why kids would read Roald Dahl. That really is the major issue.
Right.
So I read Roald Dahl to my kids. I just got through, I think, pretty much his entire corpus with my 6-year-old. And
they're extraordinary books.
Kids love it.
Of course.
Because the books are mean. Because the books are mean, right? The books are about life is a rough place where people are mean to you and social expectations are set for you. And people will talk to you about
Which is a great preparation for what the actual world is like.
Correct.
Right? Whereas now you move to a place where even egg and spoon races have been banned in England, for example, at schools, because they encourage too much aggression amongst the kids who want to win. It's like, well, where does that leave you then? So kids get taught everybody wins. You all get a participation prize. Once you have that mindset, where's the preparation for the real world?
That's right. Well, it's a war against reality. And the reality is that, for example, in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, being fat is not as good for you as not being fat, right? If you're Augustus Gloop, it turns out that you probably shouldn't overeat, but this is considered mean, so we're just going to cut the word fat.
Right, but the sensitivity reader said that
they called it enormous, right?
Yes, you couldn't be fat, but you could be enormous. What the hell are you talking about?
You can't wipe that away, but again, I think that's setting up a predicate for a broader ideological shift, which is any problems you experience in your life are through no volition of your own or any action of your own. You're not responsible for your own actions. Society at large is responsible for your actions for setting up unrealistic standards of beauty, or society is responsible for setting up some sort of sensitivity to you as a human being.
What about the damage it's done, for example? I think a lot of damage to being male, being a man, being masculine, that everything is now characterized as toxic masculinity.
Absolutely. I mean, the effect on men, and by the way, by proxy on women, because it turns out that women actually kind of like masculine men.
Of course.
In fact, all of human procreation is rooted in this essential biological fact. The destruction of men in the West is the great story of the last 40 years, which is men basically somehow got the patriarchy was so clever that they somehow convinced women that sexual liberation was actually the most wonderful thing for women. But as it turns out, it actually backfired, and it ended up destroying men, because men do need marriage. Men need roles. Men need actual things to do in the course of their lifetime. And the thing that most men did for virtually all of human history was get married, have kids, protect and defend your wife and kids. That was the role. And you were trained to do this from the time that you were a small kid. It's what, I have 3 kids going on 4. I train my kids to do this now. I talk to them about how many kids do you want to have? What kind of job do you want to have? How do you want to bring up those kids? They're small. You train kids to be adults because you know what kids want? They want to be adults. And what they want is a path from how I get to point A, being a child, to being an adult. But we as a society have completely destroyed that path because we've said that adulting is now, number 1, a verb. And number 2, we've said that being an adult is somehow no longer required of you. Society is going to take care of you. No matter what problem you have, it's everybody else's job to fix all of the rules of society around you.
Can you see why people like Andrew Tate got such traction?
Yes. So what I've said about Andrew Tate is that I would say that 75% of Andrew Tate's diagnoses of the problem are pretty correct.
Yeah, I agree.
And then I would say that a lot of his prescriptions are completely wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So he will say men have lost their role in the world, and then what he will model is cam girls. It's like, well, that's not actually the solution. But what you're saying about the problem of men losing their role and men needing to be masculine and men needing to want to win and men needing to cultivate an ability to go out and succeed and thrive in the world. All of that is 100% true. I just think that he himself on a personal level wasn't providing a model of that. To me, a model of that is a guy who is married, who has kids, who lives in the community, who betters the community he lives in, who hires people, who creates a business. Like, these are the things that, historically speaking, did define manhood. And now they no longer define manhood, and men are left
I think that you can chart the moment of deterioration from the moment James Bond started crying. It's like, you take even Bond and emasculate him. It's like he has to be in touch with his feelings. Why? Why can't he just shoot people and drink martinis and seduce women? And what's wrong with that?
Right. Well, that is, again, a cultural move. And you're right, against masculinity in pretty much every sphere. And the conflation of masculinity, which is good, with toxic masculinity, that all masculinity is bad. And so we need to feminize society overall. We don't need to feminize society overall any more than we need to masculinize society overall. What we need is for men to be men and women to be women. And that doesn't mean that women are barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. As I've said many times, my wife is a doctor, right? What it does mean is that there are essential qualities to being a woman that are different from many of the essential qualities to being a man. And these are important.
Here's one part of all this debate which I disagree with you about. So you don't agree with gay marriage or with gay parenting. I don't want to misquote you, but I think that's your position. Now, I would say that reading the rest of your views on stuff, you're very about fairness and equality for all, right? How does that fit in there? Why shouldn't two men who are gay actually be able to bring a child up? Why shouldn't they if they want to get married? How is it equal or fair for them to be excluded?
So we can take those issues one by one. So marriage is a societal institution. The question is which relationships society chooses to sanctify. So I'm not in favor of, for example, laws that criminalize homosexual activity or two men living together or two men making a lifelong commitment to one another in whatever context they wish to do that. What I'm objecting to is the idea that marriage as a term is equally applicable to relationships that are designed to produce the future generation and then raise them, as opposed to two people who love each other. The fundamental redefinition of marriage actually happened before same-sex marriage, within heterosexual marriage. Away from the purpose of heterosexual marriage is man, woman, child, to two people who love each other. Once you do that, then that obviously is going to encompass things like two men or two women. But it has no limiting principle, because then it could be any group of people who love each other. And I don't think that the government has a fundamental role in propagating relationships other than ones that have externalities that benefit society. And the chief externality that benefits society from marriage is having children, and children raised largely with their biological parents. As far as gay parenting, what I've said is that there are sort of hierarchies of options, meaning that the ideal is man, woman, child. And then, if you can't fulfill that ideal, then there's obviously gradations. I would rather that two gay men are raising a child than have that child be in an orphanage, for example. So it's not as though the alternatives are always, the ones that I would want.
But shouldn't they be allowed to have the same just rights in law to what straight couples would have?
Well, I mean,
both as,
it's more benefits than rights, right? If you're talking about a right, what you're talking about is a government non-intervention with particular activity. Now, when it comes to children, we obviously do things to protect children or provide them with
I've seen gay parents who are fantastic parents. I've seen gay parents who I think are not fantastic parents.
Sure.
I've seen a lot of straight parents who are awful, and I've seen some great straight parents. I don't really see any particular distinction about what combination you have as your parents.
So I do. And the reason I do is because, again, I think there is a fundamental distinction between woman and man. And what that means is that mothers and fathers are both necessary. And so the idea that two men can simply supplant a man and a woman on a generic average level, I don't think is true.
They're supplanting. What they're doing, this is what they are. I mean, you don't think that gay people become gay, presumably, right?
Well, I mean, I think that the notion that everyone who is gay was always gay from the time that they were born, I don't think that the data back that, per se, because we are seeing rising levels, for example, across society of people identifying in a particular way. So there is some fluidity to sexual behavior and sexual activity. There's less fluidity, probably, to sexual orientation.
But you assume that the majority,
the
majority of gay people, male and female, are born gay. Right? If you take that as a basic premise, the majority are, which I absolutely believe. I'm just not sure how it's fair or equitable to deny them the same rights to their relationship status or to parenting that you would give to straight people.
So, again, I really don't think that has anything to do with being born or not born in a particular way. I think even if they were not born in a particular way, that the government should not criminalize private activity. What I do think is that if we are talking about the benefits that a government is giving in order to propagate childbearing and rearing within the context of the biological parents, which is, again, what marriage originally was supposed to be, which is why marriage was government-sponsored.
What would you do if one of your kids, they're all very young, you have no idea, but if one of your kids turned out to be gay and wanted to get married, would you be tough enough as a dad to say, you can't do that?
I mean, I would oppose that from... So religion... So, again, marriage exists in a few different...
Religious,
yeah, I mean, religious... So marriage exists in a couple of different iterations. One is religious marriage, which is kind of what I care about. And then there is governmental sanctioned marriage, which is a public policy question.
Right.
When it comes to religious marriage, no, I'm not in favor of my religion sanctifying same-sex couples, specifically because, again, my religion propagates the idea that man, woman, and child is the model for families.
Let's take a break. I want to come back and talk to you about, the big question for Republicans. Trump v. DeSantis. What's going to happen? Who's going to win? Is Biden going to run again? And does age matter?